Daniel Davis adjusted his tie for the third time as he walked through the automated glass doors of Meridian Digital Solutions. The morning sun cast long shadows across the lobby's polished marble, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. 6 months since the divorce, 4 months since losing his house, and now this. His last chance at a decent job before his savings ran completely dry. The elevator carried him to the 15th floor, where the receptionist, a woman with unnaturally pale skin and dark circles under her eyes, barely glanced up from her computer screen. "Daniel Davis for the photography position," he said, trying to project confidence he didn't feel. She handed him a visitor's badge without looking up. "Mr. Crenshaw is waiting in conference room C. Down the hall, 3rd door on your right." The hallway felt longer than it should have, lined with photographs of the company's work, corporate headshots, product shots, event photography. Daniel paused at one image, a group photo of employees at what appeared to be a company retreat. Something about it seemed off, though he couldn't quite place what. Conference room C was dimly lit, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A man in his 60s sat at the far end of a long table, his silver hair slicked back and his dark suit impeccable despite the early hour. "Mr. Davis," the man said, rising and extending a hand. "I'm Marcus Crenshaw, Creative Director. Please sit." Daniel shook his hand, noting how cold Crenshaw's grip felt, and took a seat across from him. "Your portfolio is impressive," Crenshaw continued, sliding a manila folder across the table. "Particularly your work in photojournalism. We need someone with your eye for detail." "Thank you. I'm excited about the opportunity to transition into corporate photography." Daniel opened the folder, finding his own resume and portfolio pieces inside, but also something else. Photographs he'd never seen before. Images of him from the past few weeks, getting coffee, walking to his apartment, sitting in his car outside his ex-wife's house. His throat went dry. "I'm sorry, but what are these?" Crenshaw's smile never wavered. "Due diligence, Mr. Davis. We're very thorough about our hiring process. You'll find we take security quite seriously here." Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he closed the folder. "This feels like an invasion of privacy." "Privacy is a luxury we can't afford in our line of work," Crenshaw said, leaning back in his chair. "You'll be handling sensitive materials, working with high-profile clients. We need to know who you are, all of who you are." The room seemed to grow colder, and Daniel noticed that the windows, which had shown a bright morning sky moments before, now revealed an overcast afternoon. He glanced at his watch. 9:30 a.m., the same time it had been when he'd entered the building. "Now, if you accept the position," Crenshaw continued, "there are certain protocols you'll need to follow, rules that have kept this company successful for over 40 years. He slid another folder across the table, this one bound in what looked like aged leather. The cover bore an intricate symbol, a stylized eye surrounded by geometric patterns that seemed to shift when Daniel wasn't looking directly at them. "Rule 1, Crenshaw said, his voice taking on a rhythmic, almost hypnotic cadence. "Never photograph the same subject more than 3 times in a single session. Rule 2, always use the cameras provided by the company. Your personal equipment may not capture what we need to see. Rule 3, if you notice anything unusual in your photographs, report it immediately. And Rule 4, Under no circumstances should you take any images home with you. Daniel opened the leather folder. Inside were dozens of photographs, all seemingly normal corporate shots, until he looked closer. In each image, barely visible at first glance, was a small figure. A pink doll with pointed ears and a mischievous expression, sometimes tucked behind a plant, sometimes reflected in a window, sometimes appearing to peek out from behind the subject's shoulder. "What is this thing?" Daniel asked, pointing to the doll. "We call it the Labubu," Crenshaw said. "It appears in certain sensitive photographs. When it does, we know we're dealing with something that requires special handling." Daniel's phone buzzed. A text from his sister. "Saw your interview went well on Facebook. Weird photo though. Who's the doll?" His blood turned to ice. He hadn't posted anything on Facebook. He hadn't even told anyone about the interview except his sister, and certainly hadn't taken any photos. With shaking hands, he opened Facebook. There, posted from his account 20 minutes ago, was a selfie he'd never taken, showing him in the elevator on his way up to the interview. And there, barely visible in the reflection of the elevator's metal panel, was the pink doll. "How?" he began. "The building has excellent Wi-Fi," Crenshaw said calmly. "Automatically syncs with your devices. Very convenient." Daniel stood abruptly, the chair scraping against the polished floor. "I need to leave." "Of course," Crenshaw said, but his smile had taken on a predatory quality. "But you'll find that leaving isn't as simple as you might expect." Daniel grabbed his portfolio and headed for the door. But when he turned the handle, it wouldn't budge. He pulled harder, then pushed, but the door remained sealed. "The building goes into security lockdown during interviews," Crenshaw explained. "Standard procedure. We'll be finished soon." The windows now showed complete darkness outside, as if night had fallen in the span of minutes. Daniel's watch still read 9:30 a.m. "Sit down, Mr. Davis. Let me tell you about Meridian's real business." Against his better judgment, Daniel found himself returning to his chair, drawn by some force he couldn't understand. "We don't just take photographs," Crenshaw continued. "We collect souls, moments, memories. The Labubu is a indicator. It appears when someone carries something we need, something valuable." "You're insane," Daniel whispered. But even as he said it, he felt the truth of Crenshaw's words settling into his bones like cold lead. "Your divorce, Mr. Davis, your financial troubles, they weren't random misfortune. We've been watching you, guiding events, preparing you. You see, men in desperate situations make the most interesting subjects. The fear, the desperation. It creates such vivid impressions in our photographs." Daniel's phone buzzed again. This time, it was his ex-wife. "Daniel, stop posting those creepy photos. Emma's scared and asking why there's a monster doll following Daddy around." He looked at his Facebook feed again. 7 new photos had been posted in the past few minutes, all showing him in various locations around the building. In each one, the Labubu doll was closer, more prominent. In the most recent image, taken in the conference room just moments ago, the doll appeared to be sitting on his shoulder, its plastic eyes seeming to stare directly at the camera. "The Labubu feeds on desperation," Crenshaw explained, pulling out an antique camera with brass fittings and leather bellows. "The more desperate the subject, the stronger it becomes. And you, Mr. Davis, are quite desperate indeed." The camera's lens turned toward Daniel with a soft whirring sound. though Crenshaw's hands remained folded in his lap. "Don't worry," Crenshaw said. "The process isn't painful. You'll simply fade, bit by bit, photo by photo, until there's nothing left but the image we've captured. Your essence will join our collection, and the Labubu will move on to its next host." Daniel's professional instincts, honed by years of photojournalism, kicked in. He'd covered enough dangerous situations to recognize when he was in real trouble, and he'd learned that in crisis situations, action was better than paralysis. He lunged across the table, knocking over the antique camera. It crashed to the floor with a sound like breaking glass and screaming metal. The moment it hit the ground, the lights in the room flickered, and the oppressive atmosphere seemed to lift slightly. Crenshaw's calm demeanor cracked for the first time. "You have no idea what you've done," he snarled. The door to the conference room burst open, and Daniel ran for the hallway. Behind him, he could hear Crenshaw shouting something in a language he didn't recognize, words that seemed to scrape against his eardrums like rusted metal. The hallway had changed. It was longer now, stretching into darkness, and the corporate photographs on the walls had transformed. Each image now showed the same pink doll, growing larger and more prominent with each frame, until the final photograph showed nothing but the Labubu's grinning face filling the entire frame. Daniel ran toward what he hoped was the elevator, but the hallway seemed to stretch endlessly before him. His phone buzzed constantly now, notifications from social media accounts he'd never created, showing photographs of him running through impossible corridors, always with the doll somewhere in the frame, sometimes running alongside him like a faithful pet. He ducked into an empty office, slamming the door behind him and leaning against it. The room was filled with photography equipment, cameras, lights, tripods. But all of it looked wrong somehow. The cameras were too old, their lenses too dark, and when Daniel looked closer, he could see that they were all pointed at a single chair in the center of the room. On the chair sat a larger version of the Labubu doll, this one nearly 3 feet tall. Its pink fur was matted and stained, and its plastic eyes had been replaced with what looked like human eyes, brown and terrified and somehow familiar. Daniel recognized them as his own eyes from a photograph taken during his wedding day 6 years ago. The doll's mouth opened, revealing rows of tiny, sharp teeth. "Danny," it said in a voice that sounded like his daughter Emma, distorted through water. "Why did you leave us, Danny?" "You're not real," Daniel said, pressing his back against the door. "This isn't happening." "Look at your phone, Danny," the doll said, tilting its head to an unnatural angle. "Look at what you've become." Against his will, Daniel glanced at his phone. His Facebook feed now showed hundreds of photos, posted over the span of minutes. The images showed his entire life, his childhood, his wedding, Emma's birth, family vacations, quiet moments at home. But in every single photograph, the Labubu was there, sometimes small and hidden, sometimes prominently displayed, sometimes replacing other people entirely. In the most recent photos, the doll was growing larger while Daniel was growing smaller and more transparent, as if he was slowly being erased from his own life. The door behind him opened, and Crenshaw walked in, carrying a new camera, this one modern and digital, but emanating the same malevolent energy as the antique one Daniel had destroyed. "The Labubu has been with you your whole life, Mr. Davis," Crenshaw said, "feeding on your failures, your disappointments, your fears. The divorce was just the beginning. Soon, you'll be nothing more than a supporting character in your own existence. Daniel's mind raced. Years of investigative photography had taught him to look for patterns, for the story behind the story. The doll had appeared in every photo of his life, but there had been a progression. It had grown stronger as he had grown more desperate. "You're wrong," Daniel said, his voice steadier than he felt. "The Labubu doesn't just feed on desperation. It feeds on people who give up hope." He pulled out his own camera, the professional DSLR he'd bought during his best financial year, and pointed it at the large doll in the chair. "The thing is," he continued, adjusting his settings with practiced ease, "I never gave up hope. I lost my marriage, I lost my house, but I never stopped believing I could rebuild. That's why your process isn't working as fast as it should." The doll's expression shifted from triumph to uncertainty. Daniel's camera flashed, and the Labubu in the chair flickered like a bad television signal. "You know what else I learned as a photojournalist? Sometimes you have to become part of the story to tell it properly." He switched his camera to continuous shooting mode and began taking rapid-fire photographs of the doll, the room, Crenshaw, everything. With each flash, the oppressive atmosphere weakened, and the building's artificial reality began to crack. "Stop," Crenshaw commanded, but his voice lacked its earlier authority. "You don't understand. The Labubu is connected to everyone who's ever been photographed here. If you destroy it completely, you'll unravel decades of collected souls." "Good," Daniel said, continuing to shoot. Through his viewfinder, he could see the truth now. The building was full of transparent figures, dozens of people who had been partially or completely consumed by the Labubu's hunger. They were all connected, all trapped in an endless cycle of documentation and erasure. The doll began to shriek, a sound that seemed to come from every photograph on the walls simultaneously. The images were changing, showing the trapped souls fighting back, reclaiming their own stories. Daniel's phone exploded with notifications as his social media accounts began deleting the false photos, replacing them with the images he was taking now. Pictures that told the true story of what was happening in this place. "You're destroying everything we've built," Crenshaw said, but he was fading now, becoming as transparent as the trapped souls in the photographs. "Sometimes," Daniel said, advancing on the large Labubu doll. "That's exactly what needs to happen." He grabbed the doll and held it up to his camera, shooting directly into its face. The eyes that had once been his own began to change, filling with light and hope instead of fear and desperation. The building shook around them as reality reasserted itself. Through the windows, Daniel could see that it was still morning, that the sun was still shining, that the world outside continued to exist as it should. The Labubu doll crumbled in his hands, dissolving into pink dust that scattered in a wind that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. As it disintegrated, Daniel felt something return to him. A sense of self he hadn't realized he'd been losing, piece by piece, photograph by photograph. Crenshaw gave one final, frustrated cry before dissolving like smoke, along with the oppressive atmosphere that had filled the building. Daniel found himself standing in an empty office building. The corporate photographs on the walls were gone, replaced by faded rectangles of less discolored paint. His phone showed his real social media feeds, free of the invasive images and his camera's memory card contained only the photos he had actually taken. He walked to the elevator, pressed the button for the ground floor, and waited. When the doors opened, the same pale receptionist was there, but she looked different now. More solid, more real. "Thank you," she said simply, then stepped past him and walked toward the exit. Daniel rode the elevator down alone, watching the floor numbers decrease at their normal pace. When he reached the lobby, he could see other people emerging from various floors. The trapped souls, freed from their photographic prisons, looking dazed but alive. Outside, Daniel's phone rang, his ex-wife's number. "Daniel?" Sarah's voice sounded concerned. "I got the strangest series of notifications from your social media. But when I went to look, there was nothing there. Are you okay?" He stood on the sidewalk looking up at the Meridian Digital Solutions building. In the daylight, it looked like any other office building, ordinary and unremarkable. "I'm okay," he said, and for the first time in months, he meant it. "Actually, I think I'm better than okay. Emma wants to know if you're still coming to her recital tonight." Daniel smiled, pulling up his camera and taking a picture of the building. In the viewfinder, he could see only what was actually there: glass, steel, and concrete under a clear morning sky. No pink doll anywhere in sight. "Tell her I wouldn't miss it for anything," he said. "And Sarah?" "I'm going to get a new job. A better one. Something that doesn't involve taking pictures of other people's lives." "What are you going to do instead?" Daniel looked at his camera, thinking of all the real stories that needed to be told, all the truth that needed to be brought to light. "I think I'm going back to journalism," he said. "There are a lot of stories out there that need to be uncovered. Real stories. Important ones." As he walked away from the building, Daniel felt lighter than he had in years. The Labubu was gone, but more importantly, he had rediscovered something he thought he'd lost forever. The belief that his life was his own to shape, not something that could be stolen one photograph at a time. His phone buzzed with a text from Emma. "Can't wait to see you tonight, Daddy. I have a surprise for you." Daniel smiled and put his phone away without checking social media. He had better things to do than worry about how he appeared in other people's photographs. He had his own life to live, his own story to tell. Behind him, the Meridian building stood empty and silent, its windows reflecting nothing but the honest light of day. And in his camera, for the first time in months, every photo Daniel took showed only what was actually there. No unwelcome visitors, no sinister dolls, just the world as it truly was. The nightmare was over, but more importantly, Daniel Davis had remembered how to hope. 6 months later, Daniel's investigative series on predatory employment practices won a regional journalism award. In his acceptance speech, he talked about the importance of seeing clearly, of not letting desperation cloud one's judgment, and of never giving up the power to tell your own story. In the audience, Emma clapped enthusiastically, and even Sarah smiled with what looked like pride. That night, as Daniel reviewed the photos from the awards ceremony, he noticed something that made him pause. In the background of one shot, barely visible behind a potted plant, was a small pink figure. But when he looked closer, adjusting the contrast and brightness, he realized it was just a child's toy that someone had dropped. An ordinary doll that belonged to the real world, with no power beyond what a desperate mind might give it. Daniel deleted the photo anyway. Some stories he had learned were better left untold.